The flames snapped and hissed. He stirred the embers with the end of a branch. The crackle echoed through the stillness of the mountain night. And then his hand stilled. A shape crossed the glow. A shadow stretching long and thin across the fire. It was as if the night itself had taken form and stepped into his world. He lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. And there she was, a young woman stepping uncertainly into the circle of light. Her dress was torn at the hem from running. Her breath was ragged as though she had not stopped for miles. In the flicker of firelight, the plain iron ring on her hand gleamed faintly. A cruel band that betrayed more than her weary face ever could. His voice broke the silence, low and steady, carrying through the night like a truth long waiting to be spoken. "I've dreamed this shape before," he said. His gaze was fixed on the outline of her shadow that danced against the trees. She froze, clutching the bundle at her side as if his words were a blade. Her eyes were wide and glistening, torn between flight and collapse. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice shaking. But the fear in it was not of him alone. It was of the world behind her, the hands that had shoved the ring onto her finger, the man whose claim had chased her all the way to these mountains. The mountain man did not rise. He only set the branch aside and leaned forward slightly, the fire painting his weathered face with orange glow. He was no stranger to visions, no stranger to loneliness. Yet the sight of her made something stir deep in his chest, something heavier than memory. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the whip of the flames and her unsteady breathing. She glanced at the ring, as though it were choking her even as it clung to her hand. She tightened her fist, willing it out of sight, but the fire caught it again, making it glimmer like iron chained to her very soul. He studied her quietly, his words repeating softly, not as a threat, but as if he spoke to himself. "Yes, I've dreamed this shape before." She shuddered, torn between disbelief and a strange pull she could not name. For a heartbeat, the night seemed to lean closer, as though the fire itself demanded to know what bound them. "Why would you say that?" she snapped, her voice sharp, despite the tremor that betrayed how close she was to breaking. The fire's light caught the tears streaking her cheeks as she glared across the flames at the mountain man. "You don't know me. You can't," she added, clutching her bundle tighter. Her fist curled over the iron ring, as if hiding it could erase both the truth of her flight and the weight of her shame. He did not flinch, did not rise to her defiance. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes reflecting the glow like coals. His words came slow, measured, as though carved from stone. "Because I have seen you in dream and shadow," he said. "And now you stand before me, the same shape I could never forget." She shook her head violently, stepping back so her shadow stretched longer across the dirt, as if distance alone could break the pull of his words. "Dreams are nothing but smoke," she whispered, though her voice cracked. She wanted to believe it, because to believe otherwise was to accept that fate itself had dragged her here. A low murmur spread among the trees, only the sound of night insects, but it felt like the mountain listening in judgment. She steadied her breath and spat bitterly. "Men only dream of owning, of taking. So tell me, which are you?" The mountain man leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady, his voice quieter now, but no less certain. "Not a man who takes. A man who waits. The fire brought you here, not me." The calmness of his answer unnerved her more than anger ever could. She felt the ring burn against her skin, as if reminding her that she was already claimed, already bound to a man whose absence was more terrifying than his presence. She lifted her hand slightly, the metal glinting before she pulled it back into the folds of her shawl. The mountain man's eyes flicked to it just once. Recognition sparked before he returned his gaze to her face. Her heart hammered, panic rising as if he had seen too much already. She wanted to run, but her legs refused, rooted to the dirt by the strange gravity of his stillness. "Keep your fire," she muttered, forcing steel into her trembling voice. "I want no part of your dreams." Yet, as she turned to step away, his voice followed, steady as the mountains themselves. "And still your shadow remains." Her breath caught as the weight of his words tangled with the memories she had fought to bury. She looked down at her hand where the iron ring pressed against her skin. It was cold even in the heat of the fire, heavy as if it had been forged not from metal but from chains. She remembered the moment it was shoved onto her finger, her family's voices ringing around her like a verdict. Better a cruel husband than no bread at all. Better a roof than disgrace. She had begged them with shaking hands, had pleaded that she would work, that she would starve before being bound. But their faces had turned away, and the ring had slid across her skin like a shackle locking into place. The cruelty of it had burned deeper than any flame. It was not just her own voice silenced, but the memory of her mother, who had once told her love was meant to be chosen, not commanded. Tears pricked her eyes as she clenched her hand tighter. She felt the edge of the band cut against her palm. She whispered fiercely inside her mind, "I will not wear this forever! I will not die in his house!" The mountain man's gaze never left her. Steady, unblinking. It made her tremble because it seemed he could read every thought she tried to hide. "That ring weighs on you like a chain," he said softly. The words cut through her as though he had reached into her very chest. She shook her head sharply, fury flashing through her tears. She would not let him name what she had already named 100 times in silence. "It is nothing," she said harshly, clutching the bundle against her ribs as though it could shield her. "A circle of iron cannot break me." But the lie soured on her tongue, and her knees weakened with the truth that it already had. She turned away from the fire, staring into the black stretch of trees, wishing the night would swallow her shadow and leave nothing for him to see. Yet the flame snapped, and she heard him stir, his voice low and certain again. "Dream or not, that shadow will follow you until you choose where it belongs." The words sank deeper than the jeers of her family because they carried no cruelty, no force. Only the unbearable demand that she decide for herself what even her own kin had denied her. He watched her across the fire, this woman who wore her fear like a shroud. He saw more than a runaway. He saw a fighter, even if she didn't know it yet. He'd seen that same look once before. In the eyes of a wolf he'd cornered in a box canyon years ago. It had been wounded, bleeding, but it had refused to die cowering. It had faced him down, ready to take him with it. This woman had that same fire, banked low but not extinguished. He wondered what it would take to make it burn bright again. He spoke again, his voice pulling her back from the edge of the darkness. "The forest is no place to be alone tonight. The wolves are hunting." She spun back to him, her eyes wide. "I am not afraid of wolves." "No," he agreed, his gaze dropping for a second to the iron ring on her hand. "You're afraid of men. Men are worse. At least a wolf is honest in its hunger." The truth of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The man she was fleeing, Silas Blackwood, was a wolf in the finest clothing. His hunger wasn't for food but for power, for control. Her family had fed her to him to settle a debt she never even knew existed until the day the ring was forced upon her finger. She sank onto a fallen log at the edge of the firelight, the fight draining out of her. The bundle in her lap suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It held the last pieces of her old life, a life before Silas. But it also held the proof of his crimes. "You carry a weight that was never meant for you," the mountain man said suddenly, his voice breaking through the hush like a stone dropped into still water. She startled, clutching her hand tighter around the iron ring as if he had reached across the fire to steal it. "You don't know me," she shot back, her words sharp but trembling. "You don't know what it cost me to wear this." His eyes flickered to the fire, the flames reflecting in their dark depths. When he looked back, his voice was quieter, steady as a mountain stream. "I know more than you think. That ring on your hand. It was hammered from ore I pulled from the earth years ago. I felt it in my palms, heavy and raw." He paused, letting the impossible words sink in. "And when I dreamt of its shape," he finished, "I saw you." The words struck her harder than the jeers of her kin, harder than the silence of the empty road she had fled. Her breath caught as if the very air had betrayed her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, though her knees weakened under the certainty in his tone. "Iron is iron. It binds, it scars. It is no vision, no fate." The mountain man leaned forward, his voice firm. "I bled to bring that metal to light, and in the nights after I dreamed of a shadow that carried its weight. Tonight that shadow crossed my fire, and now I see the truth." His eyes burned with an intensity that held her captive. You were never meant to wear it as a shackle. You were meant to decide what it will become. She trembled, fury rising with her grief. It was forced on me. My family pressed it into my hand and told me obedience was survival. How could it be meant for anything else? Her tears burned, her words jagged, and she pressed the ring so hard against her skin that pain flared sharp as a blade. The crowding silence of the forest deepened as if the trees themselves strained to hear. The story was beginning to unwind, threads of fate and iron pulling tight in the firelight. Her chest ached as the mountain man's gaze held hers, unyielding, as though he would not allow her to look away from the truth he had spoken. The fire popped, sparks leaping between them. She realized with a shudder that his words had bound her more tightly than the ring ever had, because they gave her back the choice she had thought forever stolen. And just as that thought took root, the night shattered. Hooves pounded against the hard earth, sudden and sharp, breaking through the stillness like thunder rolling down the mountain. She jerked to her feet, clutching the bundle to her chest as her eyes flew wide with terror. From the tree line burst 3 riders, their lanterns swinging, faces shadowed but cruel voices unmistakable as they pulled their horses hard at the edge of the firelight. "There she is!" one shouted, the iron in his tone colder than the ring on her hand. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning the hiss of the flames. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs betrayed her, rooted to the spot as though the earth itself had turned against her. The mountain man rose in a single fluid motion. His broad shoulders cast a long shadow across the circle of light. With one deliberate step, he positioned himself between her and the riders. His hand closed firmly around the haft of his axe, though he did not raise it yet. The quiet weight of his stance carried more warning than 1,000 shouted threats. One rider leaned forward, sneering through the glow. "She belongs to another, promised, paid for, and bound. You've no right to her." Her breath caught. The words were a knife twisting into the wound her family had carved. Shame burned in her cheeks, as if the whole mountain had turned to watch. But the mountain man did not flinch. His voice rumbled like distant stone breaking loose. "A ring forged in iron cannot buy a soul." The riders shifted uneasily, their horses stamping, their lanterns casting wild shadows across the clearing. A tale was being told, not in words, but in the space between 2 opposing forces. There are men who trade women as if they were cattle, and there are men who stand like oak against the wind, daring the world to cut them down. This tale belonged to the second. She felt her knees weaken, fear clawing at her throat, yet a flicker of something else stirred beneath it. Relief, sharp and unbidden, at the wall of defiance rising between her and the chains that had pursued her. But the riders sneered again, one spitting into the firelight. "Step aside, mountain man! She'll go back with us, or you'll fall here!" The threat hung like steel in the air. The flames snapped high between them. She clutched the iron ring until her hand bled, torn between the terror of being dragged back and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would not let her be taken. The leader of the riders dismounted. He was a thick-set man with a scar that cut through one eyebrow, giving him a permanent scowl. He walked with a swagger, his hand resting on the butt of a pistol tucked into his belt. "My name is Cole," he said, stopping just outside the ring of firelight. "And Mr. Blackwood pays well. He pays for his property to be returned, unharmed if possible." His eyes slid over her, cold and assessing. "But he's not particular about the details." The threat was clear. They would drag her back, broken if necessary. "She is not property," the mountain man said again, his voice dangerously low. He hadn't moved a muscle, but a coiled tension radiated from him. Cole laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That ring on her finger says otherwise. Forged by the town smithy from Mr. Blackwood's own iron. A legal contract, witnessed and sealed. A new detail, a fresh twist of the knife. Silas Blackwood hadn't just bought a ring. He had supplied the very metal, branding her with something that came from his own land, his own hoard. The ownership was absolute, woven into the very fabric of the object. But the mountain man's expression shifted. A strange, knowing light entered his eyes. "Blackwood's iron, you say?" "The very same," Cole confirmed, puffing out his chest. "From his Northridge mine." The mountain man was silent for a long moment. Then a slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was a terrifying sight. Then you've made a mistake coming here, he said softly. Because that Northridge mine? It was mine before it was his. The air crackled. The fire seemed to burn brighter. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. This was a reckoning. Cole's swagger faltered for a half second. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. What nonsense is this? Blackwood has held that claim for 5 years. 5 years, the mountain man repeated, his voice laced with the bitterness of a long-nursed wound. 5 years since he left his partner for dead in a collapsed shaft and filed a forged deed in town. The story hung in the air, raw and bleeding. The riders exchanged uneasy glances. This was more than they'd signed on for. They were here for a runaway girl, not to settle an old blood feud. She stared at the mountain man, her mind reeling. His dream, his connection to the iron. It wasn't magic. It was memory. It was grief. He hadn't just forged the metal. He had been robbed of it. Robbed of his land, his future, by the same man who now sought to own her. They were bound not by fate, but by a common enemy. The revelation gave her a jolt of courage, a spark of anger that burned away some of the fear. "He's a thief and a liar!" she cried out, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. She held up her hand, the iron ring a dark circle against the firelight. "This isn't a contract! It's the spoils of a crime, just like the mine!" Cole's face hardened, his patience gone. "Enough stories. We have our orders." He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer cocking echoing in the tense silence. "Give her to us, or die defending what was never yours." The mountain man finally moved. He didn't lift his axe to attack. He lifted it and slammed the butt of the handle into the dirt at his feet. A gesture of finality, a drawing of a line in the earth. "My name is Cale," he said, his voice ringing with a power that seemed to shake the very trees. "And I am taking back what's mine, starting with her." The ultimatum was delivered. The lines were drawn. And in the heart of the mountains, a war that had started 5 years ago was about to be reignited by a girl with a stolen ring and a man with a stolen past. Cole's eyes narrowed. He was a hired gun, not a fool. Taking on a man like Cale on his own ground, a man who clearly had a personal score to settle, was bad business. But retreating empty-handed was worse. Blackwood was not a forgiving employer. "There's 3 of us," Cole snarled, gesturing with his pistol. "One of you." Cale's grim smile didn't waver. "You see one man," he said, "but you're standing on my mountain. It has a long memory, and it doesn't favor thieves." A cold wind whipped through the clearing, making the flames dance wildly and the lanterns of the riders swing. It was as if the mountain itself was answering him. One of the other riders' horses shied, its eyes rolling in fear. This was a place of old power, and Kyle was a part of it. The riders felt it, a primal fear that had nothing to do with axes or guns. But Cole held his ground. "Empty threats! Last chance! The girl!" Her chest tightened until every breath felt like it might be her last. The words clawed their way out before she could swallow them back, raw and jagged in the firelit clearing. "I can't go back," she cried, her voice trembling, but loud enough for the riders to hear. "But I can't go forward either. Chains bind me no matter where I turn." Tears streaked her dust-stained cheeks, her hand gripping the iron ring so tightly that the edges cut into her palm. Warm blood mixing with the metal's cold bite. This band was forced on me, pressed until I thought I would choke on its weight. And if I keep it, I am his. But if I cast it away, I am nothing. The admission tore her apart, leaving her shaking. For a breath, the only sound was the restless snort of horses and the hiss of flames. Cole sneered, his confidence returning. "She admits it herself. She's bound. Best you step aside, Kyle, before her shame spreads to you." Kyle did not move. His broad frame was still like a wall of oak. His eyes were fixed not on them but on her. And when he spoke, his voice carried not force but a steady calm that cut deeper than rage. "Fear is a chain sharper than iron," he said, "but hope is heavier still, because it asks you to trust what you cannot see." His words struck her harder than the threats, harder than the ring biting into her skin. She sobbed once, fierce and broken. "Hope terrifies me," she whispered, her knees weakening, "because it can be taken. I'd rather bear chains I can see than a promise that vanishes." Even as she spoke, she knew it was a lie. She had run, hadn't she? She had clung to a sliver of hope so sharp it had cut her to the bone. She sank lower, trembling as the riders shifted restlessly, impatient for the moment to drag her away. In her heart, she knew she could not stay suspended between terror and desire. Kale's shadow fell over her, his presence steady as stone. Though he had not touched her, she felt his words pressing her toward a choice she had never been allowed to make. A choice that had to be made now. The first gray light of dawn crept over the ridgeline, bleeding into the clearing. It paled the fire until smoke curled in thin wisps above dying embers. The faces of the riders came into sharper view. Hard lines, tight jaws, eyes that gleamed with greed rather than duty. Their horses stamped restlessly, snorting clouds of breath into the chill morning air. The iron ring on her hand glimmered dully in the weak light, as though the day itself was asking her to decide. She sat hunched on the log, trembling with exhaustion, her body aching from the miles she had fled. Yet the weight of the men's stares pressed heavier than hunger or thirst. Kale stood tall at the edge of the fire's circle, his axe hanging at his side, his silence more commanding than a shout. When the wind shifted, carrying the last smell of ash and pine, it felt like the mountain itself stood with him. "We won't wait another breath," Cole barked, his teeth bared in a snarl. "Hand her over, or we'll take her." The threat cracked through the clearing, sharp as a rifle shot. She flinched, clutching the bundle tighter, the ring biting deeper into her skin. A story was reaching its end, or perhaps its true beginning. Mornings could bring comfort, or they could reveal the cruelty of men too eager to claim what was never theirs. This was the latter, and every dawn that followed would carry its echo. Her throat burned as she lifted her face, eyes raw with sleepless tears. And for the first time, she spoke not to the riders, not to the man who had forced the band upon her, but to the stranger who stood like a wall of stone. "If I choose freedom," her voice cracked, the words trembling in the new light, "will you stand until the end?" The clearing seemed to hold its breath. Kyle's gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. He said nothing yet, but the promise in his silence made her pulse thunder louder than the horse's hooves. The riders shifted, impatient. Cole raised his hand as if to signal the charge. The morning air turned sharp as a blade, pressing down on them all. The ring cut deeper into her palm, blood warm against iron. She realized the moment of choice could no longer be delayed. "A ring has no worth unless it is freely chosen," Kale said, his voice deep and steady. It carried over the clearing with such force that even the restless horses stilled. The riders froze. Her breath caught, the words striking her like a hammer to iron. She clutched her hand tighter as if the band might burn straight through her flesh. Cole spat into the dirt, his sneer twisting into something darker. "That band was paid for. It was promised, forged in coin and bargain. She belongs to the man who bought her." Her knees trembled, the shame of those words heavier than chains. But Kale did not waver, his frame like a wall against the rising sun. "Iron can be traded, coin can be spent, but no man can own a soul. She is not cattle, not property, and no law of earth or sky will make it so." His voice cut sharp. There are moments when words weigh more than steel, when a single truth spoken aloud is enough to make men hesitate before drawing their guns. This was such a moment. The riders shifted, unease flickering through their hard faces, yet Cole pressed on, pointing a gloved hand at the trembling woman. "Look at her. She wears the ring still. She admits the bond. She belongs to him whether she wants it or not." She flinched, the truth of it searing her. She could feel the band biting into her skin, a shackle carved by her own family's betrayal. Her voice cracked, raw with despair. "Then tell me, what am I if I cast it away? A woman without name, without place, worth nothing." Kyle's gaze turned on her, fierce and unyielding. His voice was low, but it carried across the clearing. "You will be what you decide to be. Not iron, not bargain, not coin. Choice. That is what gives life its worth." His words burned hotter than the rising sun. For the first time she felt the ring grow lighter in her palm, as though it had always waited for this moment. The riders scowled, rage twisting their faces, but none dared move against him yet. His stance bore the weight of mountains, and his truth had cracked the ground beneath their threats. She stared at the ring, her tears blurring it. She knew the final choice now belonged to her alone. But as she looked at the ring, a new cold thought slithered into her mind. Cale fought for her, yes, but he also fought for his own revenge. He had called her his to take back. Was she just another piece in his war against Blackwood? A prize to be won? A way to wound his enemy? The hope that had just begun to bloom in her chest withered, replaced by a chilling doubt. Had she run from one cage, only to find herself walking into another? The question must have shown on her face. Cale's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "This isn't about owning," he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear it. "This is about ending what he started, for both of us." Was it true? Or was he just a different kind of wolf? More patient than the last? Her tears spilled faster than she could wipe them. Yet in their burning trail, she felt the weight begin to slip from her shoulders. With a trembling breath, she opened her palm and looked at the iron ring as if seeing it for the first time. It was no longer only the band her family had forced onto her finger. No longer just the proof of her humiliation or Cale's vengeance. It was a circle waiting for her voice to give it meaning. Her chest heaved as she rose slowly from the log, her legs shaking. Cole and his men leaned forward, greedy for her collapse. But instead, she lifted her hand high, the ring gleaming in the first full rays of dawn. Her voice rang clear through the clearing, cracked with tears yet stronger than it had ever been. "I am not his. I am not bought. This ring has no power but the power I give it." She took a step, then another, walking away from the log and the cowering girl she had been. She walked toward Cale, toward the man who might be her savior or her next captor. "And I choose to give it now," she declared. She turned to him, stepping into the circle of his shadow. With trembling fingers, she pressed the iron band into his broad palm. His hand closed around it gently, reverently. When his dark eyes met hers, she felt no chains, no bargain, only the steady strength of a vow unspoken, yet already kept. The riders cursed, their leader spurring his horse. But none dared charge. The mountain man's stance bore the weight of stone, and the truth had already broken their claim. A story was ending. A woman had walked from a fire, carrying nothing but scars. But in that moment, she walked into the dawn carrying her own name again, unshackled and unafraid. Not a widow, not a possession. Simply a woman. Ilara. She drew in a ragged breath, and then to her own astonishment, a laugh broke free from her throat. Not cruel or hollow, but rich and trembling with relief. The sound startled even the riders, silencing their jeers. It was not the laugh of shame, but of victory, of a spirit rising at last. Cale let the ring rest in his palm, not claiming it, not wearing it, only holding it as though it were a seed waiting for soil. And she knew in that moment that freedom did not mean walking alone. It meant choosing whom to stand beside. She stepped closer, her laughter softening into a smile. The dawn spread gold across the clearing, washing the night's cruelty away. Cole watched, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," he spat. He wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. "Blackwood will hear of this. He'll send more than 3 men next time. He'll send an army." They thundered away, leaving a sudden, ringing silence behind them. The threat lingered, a poison in the clean morning air. Blackwood would not let this go. He had been challenged, his property stolen, his authority questioned. This small victory was just the first battle in a much larger war. Alara's smile faded. The fear which had receded began to creep back in. "What have we done?" she whispered. Cale finally looked away from her, his gaze following the path the riders had taken. His face was grim. "We've woken the beast," he said. "Now we have to find a way to kill it." He opened his hand and looked at the iron ring. "It started with this, with the iron he stole from me." "Maybe," he said, a new, dangerous idea taking shape in his eyes. "This is how it ends, too." He closed his fist around the ring, and the look on his face was no longer just that of a protector. It was the look of a hunter. They left the smoldering campfire without another word. The clearing felt exposed, watched. Kyle led the way, moving with a silent, ground-eating stride that forced her to hurry to keep up. He didn't take a path. He moved through the trees, using the ridges and creeks to cover their trail. He was a ghost in his own forest. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. her breath coming in ragged bursts. Somewhere he won't think to look, Cale said without turning back. Somewhere I haven't been in 5 years. The journey was brutal. They climbed steep, rocky inclines and pushed through thick, thorny brush. Cale moved with a relentless purpose, never slowing, never seeming to tire. He was driven by something more than just escape. He was driven by a memory. Late in the afternoon, he finally stopped. They stood at the edge of a deep, sheer-walled canyon. Far below, a river snaked its way through the rocks. "We cross here," he said. She looked at the chasm, then at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How? There's no bridge." "There's a bridge," he said. "You just can't see it from here." He led her along the canyon rim to a place where two ancient, towering pine trees grew on opposite sides. Years ago, one of them had fallen, its massive trunk spanning the gap. It was a natural bridge, slick with moss and perilously narrow. "This is madness," she whispered, her stomach churning as she looked at the drop. "It's the only way," he said, his face hard. "Cole and his men will follow our tracks, but they ride horses. They can't cross here. On the other side is the one place Blackwood would never dare to follow." He didn't wait for her to agree. He stepped onto the log bridge as calmly as if he were crossing a street. He walked with a steady, balanced grace, never looking down. When he reached the other side, he turned and waited for her. She stood frozen, her fear a physical thing, holding her in place. The wind howled up from the canyon, trying to push her back. "I can't!" she cried, her voice snatched away by the wind. Cale's voice came back, clear and steady, cutting through the gale. "Yes, you can. Don't look down. Look at me. Just walk toward me." She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought of Silas Blackwood's cold smile. She thought of Cole's cruel sneer. She thought of the life that awaited her if she went back. Slowly, shakily, she put one foot on the log, then the other. She kept her eyes locked on Cale, a fixed point in a spinning world. He didn't move, his gaze holding hers, a silent promise of safety. She took one step, then another. The log shifted slightly under her weight. A gasp escaped her lips. "You're all right," Cale's voice called out. "Keep coming." She was halfway across when she heard it, a shout from the other side of the canyon. She risked a glance back. Cole and his men were there, at the canyon's edge. They had followed them after all. Cole raised his rifle. "Get down!" Cale roared. A shot rang out. A splinter of wood exploded from the log, just inches from her foot. She screamed and lost her balance, her arms flailing as she pitched sideways into the empty air. Her fingers scrabbled against the rough bark of the log, catching hold just as she was about to fall into the abyss. She dangled there, the bundle she carried swinging wildly, her knuckles white as she clung on for dear life. Below her, the river was a hungry, roaring beast. Another shot rang out, hitting the log again. Cole was trying to shoot her hand, to make her fall. Cale didn't hesitate. He ran back out onto the log bridge, his movements impossibly fast and sure-footed. He threw himself down, sliding the last few feet on his stomach, and grabbed her wrist just as her grip began to fail. His hand was like a band of steel around her arm. He held her, his muscles straining, the veins standing out on his neck. "I've got you!" he grunted, his face inches from hers. "Don't let go!" Cole fired again. The bullet whizzed past Cale's head, so close she felt the air move. "We have to move!" Cale yelled over the roar of the wind and the river. He began to pull her up, his strength immense, but they were a perfect target, exposed and helpless on the narrow bridge. Cole was taking his time now, aiming carefully for a killing shot. Then, from behind Cole, a new figure appeared. A man on a fine black horse, dressed not in the rough clothes of a thug, but in a tailored city suit. He rode to the canyon's edge and raised a hand. Cole lowered his rifle, a look of confusion on his face. The man in the suit dismounted. He walked to the edge and looked down at them, a cold, calculating smile on his face. It was a face she had only seen once before, in a faded photograph on the mantel of Cale's burned-down cabin. It was Silas Blackwood. "Well, well, Cale," Blackwood called out, his voice carrying easily across the chasm. "I see you haven't lost your flair for the dramatic. Always did have a soft spot for lost causes." Kyle's face was a mask of pure hatred. "Blackwood," he spat. "I must admit I'm impressed," Blackwood continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. When Cole told me you were involved, I couldn't believe it. I thought you were just a ghost story the miners told. But here you are. A little rougher around the edges, but alive. He paused, his cold eyes shifting to her. And you found yourself a new partner. Though I must say, my dear, your taste in men is questionable. First me, now this. Relic. The bundle, which had been slung over her shoulder, slipped. The knot came undone. Its contents spilled out, not clothes, not keepsakes, but papers. Dozens of them, caught by the wind, fluttering down into the canyon like wounded birds. One of them, a heavy parchment with a red wax seal, landed on a rocky ledge just below them. Blackwood's smile vanished. His eyes widened, his face paling in a way she had never seen before. The deed, he whispered, his voice a choked gasp. It wasn't just any deed. It was the original deed to the North Ridge mine, the one Cale said had been forged. And Cale's name was on it, clear as day. "And the ledgers," Cale grunted, finally managing to haul her back onto the relative safety of the log. "The ones that prove you were stealing from the company accounts long before you tried to kill me." Blackwood stared, his composure shattered. He had come here to retrieve a runaway woman. He had found the ghost of his past, holding the proof that could destroy his entire empire. "Kill them!" Blackwood shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "Kill them both! And get me those papers!" Cole and his men raised their rifles, but Cale was already moving. He pushed her ahead of him. "Go! Get to the other side!" He turned back, pulling the heavy axe from his belt. He didn't charge. He began to chop at the log bridge itself, great splinters of wood flying with every swing. He was going to cut them off, trapping them on one side and himself and Alara on the other. But the log was thick, ancient wood. It would take time. Time they didn't have. Bullets began to rain down around them, thudding into the log, whining past their heads. The wood groaned, splintering under the furious assault of Cale's axe. The bridge began to sag, to tremble. "It's going to go!" she screamed. "Keep moving!" Kyle yelled back, not stopping his frantic chopping. She scrambled the last few feet, tumbling onto the solid ground of the far canyon rim just as the log gave way with a final shuddering crack. It fell into the chasm, taking Cale with it. She screamed his name, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony. She crawled to the edge, peering down into the abyss. She saw the log hit the river far below, exploding in a shower of spray and splintered wood, but of Cale there was no sign. He was gone, swallowed by the roaring water. Across the canyon, Silas Blackwood stared at the empty space where the bridge had been. Then he looked at the deed, still resting on the ledge below him, just out of reach. He looked at her, alone and unprotected, and he began to laugh. A wild, triumphant laugh that echoed off the canyon walls. He had won. The proof was lost. The ghost was gone. And she was trapped. She lay on the cold stone of the canyon rim, the sound of Blackwood's laughter a poison in her ears. Kyle was gone. The hope he had sparked in her was extinguished, leaving only the cold ash of despair. She was alone, truly alone. The war was over before it had even begun. She should have felt terror. She should have felt the crushing weight of defeat. But as Blackwood's laughter continued to echo, something else began to burn inside her, a cold, hard anger. He had taken everything from Kyle, his land, his life, and now his final desperate act of defiance. And he was laughing. She would not let him win. Slowly she got to her feet. She looked across the chasm at the man who thought he was invincible. She saw the deed, that precious piece of paper still perched on the ledge. It was his obsession, his one weakness. And she knew with a sudden, chilling clarity what she had to do. She began to climb down. The rock face was steep, the handholds treacherous, but she moved with a desperate, fearless grace. She was no longer running from a monster. She was hunting one. Across the canyon, Blackwood's laughter died in his throat. He watched her, his eyes wide with disbelief, as she made her way down the cliff face. "What is she doing?" he demanded. "Stop her!" Cole raised his rifle, but the angle was impossible. She was shielded by the overhang of the canyon rim. She reached the ledge. She picked up the deed, the heavy parchment, a weight of justice in her hand. She looked up at Blackwood, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "You want this?" she yelled, her voice carrying across the canyon. "Come and get it." And then, before he could react, she turned and continued climbing. Not back up, but down. Down toward the roaring river. Down toward the place where Kyle had vanished. She didn't know if he was alive. She didn't know if she would survive the descent. But she knew one thing. She would rather be swallowed by the river than let this piece of paper fall back into Blackwood's hands. She was no longer a victim. She was a guardian. A keeper of a promise made to a dead man. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. The river was a torrent of icy, churning water. It grabbed her, pulling her under, slamming her against unseen rocks. The deed was clutched in her hand, a fragile shield against the chaos. She fought for air, for purchase, her lungs burning. The current was relentless, dragging her downstream, away from the canyon, away from Blackwood and his men. Just as her strength gave out, just as the darkness began to close in, a hand clamped onto the collar of her dress and hauled her from the water. She coughed, sputtering, water pouring from her mouth. She lay on a gravel bank, shivering and gasping for air. When she could finally focus, she saw him. Kyle. He was alive, battered, bruised, a bloody gash on his forehead, but alive. He knelt beside her, his face a mixture of relief and grim determination. "I told you," he said, his voice a low rasp. "This mountain doesn't favor thieves." He had survived the fall, carried by the current until he could pull himself to shore. He had been making his way along the riverbank, looking for her. She pushed herself up, her hand flying to check her dress. The deed was still there, tucked safely inside, soaked but intact. A weak smile touched her lips. "I kept it," she whispered. "I knew you would," he said. They were alive. They were together. And they had the one thing that could destroy Silas Blackwood. But they were far from safe. They were miles from civilization, with no food, no weapons but Cale's axe, which he had miraculously held onto, and a ruthless madman hunting them. Blackwood would not give up. He would find another way across the canyon. He would send men downriver. The hunt was still on. "He'll come for this," she said, touching the deed. "He won't stop until he has it back." "I know," Cale said. He looked down at the river, then up at the towering peaks that surrounded them. "So we stop running. We find a place to make a stand. A place of my choosing, not his." He got to his feet, pulling her up with him. "There's a place," he said, his eyes distant as if looking into the past. "An old prospector's cabin, hidden in a valley so deep they say the sun only touches it for an hour a day. It's easily defended, and it's close to the North Ridge." He looked at her, his eyes burning with a new fire. "It's time to go home, and take back what's ours." The journey to the hidden valley was a trial of fire. They moved by night, resting during the day, Cale's knowledge of the wilderness their only guide. He taught her how to read the stars, how to find edible plants, how to move without leaving a trace. She was a quick study, her senses sharpened by the constant danger. They were no longer a man and a woman. They were a team. A pair of wolves, hunted, but not broken. The cabin was exactly as he'd described it. A small, rough-hewn structure, nestled at the base of a towering cliff, its back to the stone. It was almost invisible, shielded by a thick stand of ancient pines. A narrow, winding path was the only way in or out. It was a fortress. Inside, it was a time capsule. A layer of dust covered everything. A rusted pickaxe leaned against the wall. A tin coffee pot sat on the cold stone hearth. It was as if the old prospector had just walked out one day and never returned. "We'll be safe here," Cale said. "For a while." For 2 days, they rested. They recovered their strength. And in the quiet moments, they talked. He told her about his life before Blackwood, about the excitement of the first strike at the mine, the dreams he'd had of building a life, a family. He spoke of his betrayal with a cold, matter-of-fact anger, the pain buried so deep it had turned to stone. She, in turn, told him about her family, about the failing farm, the mounting debts, the whispers that had turned to demands. She told him about the day her father had come to her, his face ashamed, and told her she was to be married to Mr. Blackwood to save them all. She had been a sacrifice on the altar of their survival. They were two sides of the same coin, both victims of Blackwood's insatiable greed. On the third day, Cale looked out from the mouth of the valley. "He's found us," he said, his voice flat. In the distance,
A thin column of smoke rose into the sky. A signal fire. Blackwood's men were closing in, sweeping the mountains, flushing them out. "They won't find this path easily," Cale said. "But they will find it. We have a day, maybe two." He turned to her, his face set. "I'm going to the mine." "What?" "Why?" she asked, her heart sinking. "It's a trap." "It's the only place he'll feel safe," Kyle explained. "It's his seat of power. He'll have men guarding every approach, but he won't expect an attack from inside." He tapped his temple. "I know that mine better than he does. There are old tunnels, forgotten shafts, ways in that aren't on any map."
He looked at her, his expression serious. "But I need you to do something for me. Something dangerous." He took the iron ring from his pocket, the ring that had started it all. "I need you to take this back to town, to the assayer's office. His name is Peters. He's an old man, but he's honest. He was a friend of my father's. Show him this ring. Tell him to test it. There's a vein of silver that runs through the iron at North Ridge. It's unique. A signature. It will prove this ring was forged from my iron, from my land." He took the deed from her. "Give him this, too. Tell him to hide it. Tell him to wait for my signal." "And what's the signal?" she asked, her voice a whisper. A grim smile touched Cale's lips. "He'll know it when he sees it." It was a desperate plan. It meant separating. It meant she would have to walk back into the lion's den. "I can't leave you," she said, her voice shaking. "You must," he said, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. "This isn't just about revenge anymore, Alara. It's about justice. He has to be exposed. The deed is our proof. But the ring is our witness. You are the only one who can carry it." He was right. It was a burden only she could bear. That night, under the cover of darkness, she slipped out of the valley. Cale watched her go, a ghost disappearing into the trees. Then he turned and headed in the opposite direction, toward the dark, gaping maw of the Northridge mine, toward a final, bloody confrontation with the man who had stolen his past and the woman who had become his future. The town was a hornet's nest. Blackwood's men were everywhere, their presence a suffocating blanket of intimidation. They patrolled the streets, their eyes scanning every face. They were looking for her. She moved like a shadow, keeping to the back alleys, her face hidden by a shawl she had fashioned from a piece of old canvas in the cabin. She reached the assayer's office, her heart pounding. The sign was faded, the window dusty. It looked like a place the world had forgotten. She slipped inside. The old man, Peters, looked up from his work, his eyes magnified by thick spectacles. He was small and frail, with wispy white hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice reedy. She closed the door behind her and pulled back her shawl. She laid the ring and the deed on the counter. "Cale sent me," she whispered. The old man's eyes widened. He stared at her, then at the ring. He picked it up, his gnarled fingers turning it over and over. "Cale," he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. "I thought he was dead." "He's not," she said. "But he will be if you don't help us. Blackwood is hunting him." Peters's face hardened. He looked at the deed, his lips tightening into a thin, angry line. "That monster," he muttered. "I knew it. I knew that deed was a forgery. But I had no proof, and I was too afraid to speak." He looked at her, a new resolve in his old eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore." He took the ring to his workbench. He lit a small forge, the bellows whispering to life. He worked with a quiet, practiced skill, his hands steady. He scraped a small filing from the ring and placed it in a crucible. He added a drop of acid. They waited, the silence in the small shop thick with tension. The metal hissed. A wisp of smoke curled up. And then a tiny, unmistakable gleam appeared at the bottom of the crucible. Silver. "It's here," Peters breathed, his voice filled with awe. Just as he said, "The signature of the North Ridge." He looked at her, his eyes shining. "We have him," he said. "We have the proof." At that moment, the door to the shop burst open. Two of Blackwood's men filled the doorway, their faces grim. "The girl," one of them said, his eyes locking on her. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you." They had found her. The trap had been sprung. But who was the hunter, and who was the prey? They didn't grab her. They didn't draw their guns. Their orders were clearly to bring her in without a scene. She had one chance. "I was just leaving," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. She looked at Peters, a silent message passing between them. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. He would protect the proof. She walked out of the shop, flanked by the two men. They led her up the street, toward the grand brick building that housed Blackwood's office. The entire town seemed to be watching, their faces pale and fearful behind their windows. She walked with her head held high. She was no longer the terrified runaway who had stumbled into Cale's camp. She was a soldier, walking into the heart of the enemy's fortress. She had delivered the witness. Now it was up to Cale to deliver the signal. The North Ridge mine was a scar on the face of the mountain, a dark wound that bled profits for Silas Blackwood. Cale moved through the tunnels like a phantom, his bare feet making no sound on the rock floor. He knew every twist, every turn, every secret passage. This place was a part of him, a part that Blackwood had tried to kill and bury. He found what he was looking for in a deep, abandoned shaft. A cache of old dynamite left behind by the prospectors from years ago, still wrapped in oiled canvas. It was a risky, unstable hoard, but it would be enough. He worked quickly, his hands sure and steady. He laid charges at the key support timbers of the main shaft, the one that led directly beneath Blackwood's office at the top of the processing plant. He was not just going to destroy the mine. He was going to bring the whole corrupt enterprise crashing down. He saved one stick of dynamite for himself, along with a long fuse. As he worked, he could hear the sounds of the mine around him, the rumble of ore carts, the shouts of the foreman, the rhythmic clang of hammers on steel, the sounds of his stolen legacy. He found his way to a small, hidden ventilation shaft that opened up just behind the processing plant. He could see Blackwood's office, its windows blazing with light against the encroaching dusk. He could see Alara being led inside. His jaw tightened. He had to trust her. He had to trust their plan. He lit the fuse. It sputtered to life, a small, angry snake of fire eating its way toward the explosives. He had timed it carefully. He had 10 minutes. He climbed out of the shaft and began to run, not away from the mine, but toward the town. He had to be in place for the final act. Inside the office, Alara faced Silas Blackwood across a massive mahogany desk. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, a king on his throne. The two thugs stood by the door. "I must commend your persistence," Blackwood said, a smug smile on his face. "But the game is over. You have nothing. Cale is dead, and the deed is at the bottom of a river. You are a loose end, a very pretty one, I admit, but a loose end nonetheless." "You're wrong," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Cale is alive, and the proof is safe." Blackwood's smile faltered. "What proof? You have nothing." "I have a witness," she said, holding up her hand. The place where the iron ring had been was a raw, red mark. "A witness that proves the ring you used to brand me was made from stolen iron. An honest man is testing it right now." Blackwood paled. He stared at her, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated them both. "It doesn't matter," he hissed, his composure cracking. "No one will believe the word of an old drunk and a runaway whore against me. I own this town." At that exact moment, the world shook. A low, deep rumble started deep within the earth. It grew to a deafening roar. The floor bucked. The windows shattered. The whole building groaned as its foundations were ripped apart. The dynamite had gone off. Blackwood was thrown from his chair. The two thugs were knocked off their feet. The office dissolved into a chaos of flying glass, splintering wood, and choking dust. Alara had braced herself against the wall. Through the shattered window, she could see it. The signal. A massive column of fire and smoke erupted from the top of the North Ridge, a funeral pyre for Blackwood's greed. The processing plant, his symbol of power, was collapsing into the ground. The signal. In the chaos, she ran. She dodged falling debris, scrambled over the stunned bodies of the guards, and burst out of the office. The street was in turmoil. People were running, screaming, pointing at the pillar of fire on the mountain. She didn't stop. She ran toward the assayer's office. Peters was waiting for her at the door, the deed in one hand, the assayer's report in the other. "It's time," he said, his old eyes blazing. They ran together toward the center of town, where the crowd was gathering. From the other end of the street, Kyle appeared. He was covered in dust and grime, but he was moving with a grim purpose. In his hand, he held the last stick of dynamite, its fuse unlit. The townspeople saw him, and a wave of whispers and gasps went through the crowd. The ghost of North Ridge, the man Blackwood had buried. He was real. They all converged in the town square, a strange trio of rebels. An old man, a young woman, and a ghost, armed with dynamite. Blackwood staggered out of his ruined building, his fine suit torn, his face bleeding. He saw them. He saw the deed in Peters's hand. He saw the fire in Cale's eyes. He saw the defiance on Alara's face. He saw his empire turning to dust. And he snapped. "They're trying to destroy us!" he screamed at the crowd, his voice a raw shriek of fury. "He's a madman! She's a thief! Seize them!" Some of his men, who had recovered from the blast, started to move forward. The crowd wavered, caught between the fear of Blackwood and the undeniable truth of the fire on the mountain. "This is his truth!" Peters roared, holding up the deed for all to see, a forged claim built on a dead man's name. "And this is his justice!" Alara cried, holding up the assayer's report. "Proof of his theft, written in iron and silver!" Kyle stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He just lit the fuse on the stick of dynamite. It hissed to life, a deadly spark in the growing twilight. He held it up, a clear, unmistakable threat. The crowd fell back. Blackwood's men froze. No one was willing to die for Silas Blackwood's greed. He was alone. He stared at Cale, at the burning fuse, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "You," he whispered. "It was always you. It was always us," Cale said, his voice cold as the grave. He looked at Alara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Blackwood made a last, desperate move. He drew a small pistol from his coat and fired at Cale, but Alara was faster. She threw herself in front of Cale, a human shield, an act of pure, selfless instinct. The bullet never reached her. A single shot rang out from a different direction, from the rooftop of the sheriff's office. Blackwood grunted, a look of surprise on his face, and crumpled to the ground. The town sheriff, a man long in Blackwood's pocket, stood there, a smoking rifle in his hand. He had finally chosen a side. He had chosen justice. Cale tossed the dynamite high into the air. It exploded harmlessly against the night sky, a final defiant firework, a celebration. It was over. In the ringing silence, Alara looked at Cale. He looked at her. They had won. They had faced the beast and slain it. The town, finally free from the shadow of Silas Blackwood, erupted in a roar of celebration. They were surrounded, lifted up, hailed as heroes. But in the midst of the chaos, Alara and Cale only had eyes for each other. They had started as two broken strangers, bound by a common enemy. They had become something more, a team, a family. Months passed. The town began to heal. The Northridge mine, now legally owned by Cale and Alara, was reopened. Its profits shared with the community that Blackwood had bled dry for so long. They didn't rebuild Cale's old cabin. They built a new house, on a hill overlooking the valley, a place of light and warmth. The old prospector's cabin became a monument, a memory of the time they had spent hiding in the dark, finding a future in each other's stories. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, Cale took her hand. The red mark from the iron ring had faded to a faint silver scar. "It seems you're still branded," he said, his voice soft. She smiled. "It's not a brand," she said. "It's a reminder that chains can be broken, that a life can be chosen." He pulled something from his pocket. It was a new ring, a simple, elegant band of silver, gleaned from the purest vein in their mine. "Then choose this one," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Not as a chain, not as a bargain, as a promise." She looked at him, at this man who had stood for her, fought for her, and walked through fire with her. The man who had shown her that hope was not a fragile thing to be feared, but a force as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. Her own tears welled, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose this. I choose you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was light, comfortable. It felt like coming home. They had faced down their ghosts, they had reclaimed their pasts, and together they had forged a future, not from iron and bargains, but from courage, justice, and love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.